Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and today I'm going to be reading from a different particular book. This is the book I'm going to be reading from. The book I read earlier today was from another particular book, which I thought was this book, but it wasn't. This book is by Gerald Massey. It's called The Historical Jesus and the Mythical Christ. Is Separation Fact from Fiction. That's a different title. This book is approximately over 200 some pages long, actually a little over 200 pages. It has more what I would call explanations of key words, which I find very important. But this is also a tougher read than other ones I've read. Um, and so, uh, we'll get through it. We'll try to, and hopefully we'll learn something here, especially. Uh, he has a glossary. He has glossary of terms here, which is not self-explanatory. It's actually most people don't know what they are, including me. So we're going to look at that maybe tonight, maybe not. I've been reading this book, like I said, had it for a couple of weeks, I think. But it's a tough setting. It's a very tough sledding book. It's far more here. Unfortunately, the print in this paperback, is inferior. I find it really frustrating to read. So let me just read something here real quickly, and then we'll get into the book here. Uh, it has a diagram, or what I call a explanation of what triangle means. This figure is in a dual character, also forms the six-pointed star, or figure of space in six directions. The hexagram of the heaven that follows the heptanomes, Heptanomis, heptanomus, a change that was likewise indicated by the dragging, losing one of its seven heads. Planisphere, as a previous volume in Egypt, the seven spirits are also described in a more abstract phase as, quote, Khuti, Khuti, the brilliant triangle or pyramid in shining place. The two is the mystical spirit from the mystical place. Three, the blessed spirit from the blessed place. Four, the destructive spirit from the from the place of destruction. Five, the revealing spirit from the opening. Six, the elevated spirit from a high place. And seven, the hidden spirit from the Amen. The seven spirits will also continue in the seven doves of the Christian onographical, supposed and symbolize the seven gifts of the Holy Spirit. The elementary spirits, whether in external or in human nature, did not rise beyond the number seven, as human constitutes. The sixth was creative spirit, the Rosh of puberty, and the seventh attained a summit in the soul. Lastly, divinity or Godhead was reached by the eighth, the repeater of or to the rest. In the ritual, the seven elementary can be identified as the soul of Seven, Sevekh. The deceased exclaims, Shu causes me to shine as a living Lord, and be made the seventh when he cometh forth. End quote. I am the one born of Sevet, the Lord. End quote. Sevet signifies the number seven. The seventh was the highest elementary force. Seventh, that is, the seventh was the crocodile type. He attained the dignity of the first god as seventh Cronus, the dragon. In the Kafir dialects, the crocodile and the soul are synonymous, as they were in seventh on account of his superior intelligence. It should be observed that the soul of Seth, S-E-B, the Idi Fatty, father of the fifth creation, is identical with the Buddha, is the fifth principle of element, as the animal soul, that of Ptah. The sixth is one with the Buddha as the sixth principle, while Adamon, ATMA, the seventh is the name by name and nature as Atom of the seventh creation, in whose keeping is the reserved soul as the seventh in the series. So anyway, that was just part of the thing I want to read. I'm going to get into the book here. Just bear with me. So let's get to the reading here as I read here. Um, so this is part of the preface, and this again is from Gerald Massey. In all my years of research into religion, I found many like-minded souls who are exploring and researching diligently. It has always been the case that only the more intelligent and open-minded of those know who Gerald Massey was. Massey was an Egyptologist who wrote a tremendous body of scholarly work in the earliest part of the 20th century. What he concluded was that much of Christianity and the belief structure can be found in far earlier forms of Egyptian mythology. At first, this sounds like a rather strange theory. Upon hearing it, most people who had been brought up as Christians turned to switch on the idea, as it's often been termed. The idea is completely shut down. This is what people do. They shut down. They can't handle it. You see, you can talk to them, and it's like they're blank. Their eyes are blank. They don't know what you're talking about. So they're not ready. They're not ready for the truth. The idea is completely shut down without much consideration, if any. Too much has been invested in a sacred belief system to have it damaged or even destroyed in a couple of hours by one book. A defense mechanism kicks in the switch, and the idea of immediate shutdown before it can melt down the core of Christian belief. We don't want any emergencies here without a safety zone. Everything could go haywire. So very few Christians are going to be open to this. And it says very clear here, as you said earlier, these are people who are only people who know Gerald Massey, who he is those who are intelligent or those who are open-minded. The rest don't know who this guy is, and that's not who I'm talking to. That's not even the aim of the rest of the people. I'm not even aiming at because I know they're not open. They're not open-minded. They will give you a spiel as though Jesus was a literal person, and they'll do it every time. But I used to be in that camp also, so I can understand that. But I don't believe that anymore because it's a belief system. On top of providing such an interesting shock to the system, quote, Massey is a welcome challenge to read. It takes effort, but enjoyable effort to observe his work because his research is so thorough. Yes, it is. A little effort towards self-education never hurt anybody, at least not too much. So go ahead, venture outside the traditional safety zone and take it in a new and interesting viewpoint. It's okay. Although it goes against the grain, one won't go to hell for trying to become educated with an alternate view. It is good to weigh all options, especially if they are intelligently presented. At the same time, we must remember that Macy is not God, and he may not have all the answers. What he states may not be the gospel truth. It is only one man's interpretation. However, he happened to think that upon reading the evidence, one would agree with him. A large number of people seem to be in such agreement, including some of the most respected scholars and researchers in the field of religious studies. So if you want a different and compelling view of Christianity and its roots, this is the book to read. This is by a gentleman named Paul Tice, T-I-C-E. Sketches of his life. Gerald Massey, an English poet, born near Trent, T-R-I-N-G, in Herefordshire, in May of 1838. He was the child of a poor and illiterate couple who lived in a horror, Horel, and were barely able to feed and clothe their children. His whole education was confined to a few months at a penny school, where he learned to read and write at 8 years of age. He was sent to work in the neighboring silk mill, S-I-L-K, mill. His weekly earnings, which never exceeded 1 shilling, and I guess 3D, I don't know what that is. You guys in England can tell me that. Being deemed indispensable to eke out the subsistence of the family. From this unhealthy labor, which confined him 12 or 13 hours a day, he was released by the destruction of the mills, and soon after he was employed in straw plaiting, P-L-A-I-T-I-N-G, a occupation if possibly more unwholesome than the other. Living in the marshes region and deprived of opportunity for exercise, the whole family for some time prostrated by, um, I guess it's August, Agues, and their life became a constant struggle with want and misery. Young Miss Massey nevertheless contrived to read whatever books were accountable or accessible to him. And at the age of 15, when he went to London to seek employment as an errand boy, and made himself familiar with the Bible, the Pilgrim's Progress, and Robinson Crusoe, and a few Wesley tracts. That's from the two Wesley brothers, the religion under the Methodist beliefs. In the metropolis, which while following his humble occupation, he read with avid whatever came in his way, sitting up until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. At 17 years of age, he fell in love, and under the influence of his passion, felt the first impulses to poetic compositions. Quote, "The first verses I ever made," he says, "were upon hope, when I was utterly hopeless, and after I had begun, I never ceased for about 4 years, at the end of which time I rushed into print." End quote. Some of these early poems dwelling upon the sufferings of the poor and the quote power of knowledge, virtue, and temperance to elevate them, end quote, appeared in the columns of a provincial journal, and subsequently a collection of them was published in his native town, that is in Trent, under the title of Poems and Catechisms. The French Revolution of 1818, by introducing him to look into the causes of poverty and misery and the anomalies of social life, and to view politics through the medium of such authors as Thomas Paine and Volney, V-O-L-N-E-Y. It's very difficult to read this book, even at this point. Had the greatest, I'm sorry, by the print here. It's very poorly, they didn't use what I would call very good print. Had the greatest effort on him of any circumstances connected with his life, end quote. Under the influence of the time, he started in conjunction with some fellow, quote, working men in April of 1849, it looks like, a cheap weekly newspaper called the, quote, Spirit of Freedom, end quote, edited and half written by himself, and which became the vehicle of many articles from his pen of a ultra radical tone. So he was becoming very radical in his perspective, because he knew that this was not the way people should be treated. Mr. Massey has lectured extensively on spiritualism, in which he is a believer, and on literal topics in the United States. In 1873, he has published the Ballad of Babe, just a babe, and other poems. For the last 12 years, he has been preparing the matter and writing his great works, quote, a book of the beginnings and natural Genesis, end quote, which works will doubtless give him lasting fame. They are the ripe fruit of long research and painstaking collection of authorities, and must be accepted in years to come as the lever which has chiefly aided in the overthrow of the false system of historical Christianity. In 1883 and 84, Mr. Massey lectured in various parts of the United States upon the Christian religion from the standpoint of the economical Christology. He also visited Australia in 1884 and 85, and repeated the lectures there. Mr. Massey is now, and that is in 1886, a resident of London, England. This is by called the Publishers. The summary of contents are going to be here. He says pre-Christian Christology, the Persian Revelation, end of the great year, fulfillment of astronomical prophecy, cross type of the equinox in the bull, the ram, and the fishes, pyramid of Har Krunati, the miseries of the seven stars, the God, the Alpha and Omega, equinox in Pisces, the fishman, Horus at Isis, the Christ, the birthplace in heaven, its localization on earth, Egyptian annihilation, conception, birth, and adoration of the babe, Khonsu and the Christ, child born in the cave of the Solist, decree of Augustus, Horus type of the Christ, Ra type, Ra, R-A type, the Christ born of Seth or Earth, Hepte, type of Christ, the two halves of Horus united to form the Christ, Khonsu, the expeller of demons as Christ, Aesop, and Horus, Enoch as Horus, the twins as John and Jesus, Osiris, the well of life, the 12 in Hades, miracles in the loaves and fishes, Gnostic interpretations, Hermetic Sermon on the Mount, child older than the Father, mysteries of the solar God converted into history, the Charas or mummy Christ, the mythos worked over twice, the two dates of the crucifixion, the ass and the colt, lunar, John, a earlier Messiah, two Christs continue in Rome, the seven women who fed the Christ identified, the four general councils of the Mount, the seven fishermen, the origin of the four Gospels, that is Matthias, the Egyptian Mati, M-A-T-I, Gospel of Truth, Egyptian type of Christ in the catacombs, the Gnostic link, Jehoshua, Ben Pandera, Paul, the opponent of the carnalizers, why the quote, a Gnostic conquered false teaching and coming in of economical Christology. The natural Genesis, that is explanatory, contains the second half of a book of the beginnings and completes the author's contributions to the new order of thought that has been inaugurated to our own era by the writings of Darwin and Wallace, and Spencer and Huxley, Morgan and McLennan, Tyler and Lovett. It was written by evolutionists for evolutionists and is intended to trace the natural origins and teach the doctrine of development. The total work is based upon the new matter supplied by the ancient monuments ranging from the revelation of the bone caves and the records of the Stone Age to the latest discoveries of hieroglyphic inscriptions, the cuneiform tablets, and the still extant language of gesture signs. The work is not only one of original research, it is emphatically aboriginal. And the battle for evolution has been continued among the difficult defies and fastness of the enemy. This book contains the entire section of what we call Chapter 13 of Gerald Massey's great work called National Genesis. The reader will find at the close of the book the footnotes of the original work, a glossary of unusual words, and an index of the subject treated. The publication of this work is in cheap form, in which the appropriate approval of Mr. Massey, who wishes that it may reach a wide circuit of readers. A careful study of the work will usually result in the conviction that Mr. Massey is correct in the conclusion as to the origins of Christianity. His dedication here in a poem simply says, "At times I had to tread where not a star was found, to lead or light me overhead, nor footprint on the ground. I toiled among the sands and stumbled with my feet, or crawled and climbed with knees and hands, some future path to beat. I had to feel the flow of waters whelming me. No foothold to be touched below, no shore around to see. Yet in my darkest night and further drift from land, there dawned within the guiding light. I felt the unseen hand. Year after year went by, and watchers wondered which the diver to their welcome cry. Oh, joy would rise again, and still roll on time wave. That that whitened as it passed. The ground is getting towards the grave that I have reached at last. Child after child would say, quote, ah, when his work is done, Father will come with us and play, end quote. 'Tis done, and playtime gone. A willing slave for years, I strove to set men free. Mine were the labors and hopes and fears. Be theirs the victory. Gerald Massey. So here's the, I'm going to just a couple pages here, I think, of, he gives also his distracts from the introduction of the natural Genesis by Gerald Massey. The writer has taken the precaution all through of getting his fundamental facts of geology verified by one of the foremost leading authorities, Dr. Samuel Birch, to whom he returns his heartiest acknowledgments. He also sincerely thanks Captain R.F. Burton, B-U-R-T-O-N, and Mr. George St. Clair for their helpful hints and for the time and labor they had kindly given during the progress of this work. The main thesis of my work includes the Kamite, origin of the pre-Aryan matter essence in language and mythology found in the British Islands, the origin of the Hebrew and Christian theology and the mythology of Egypt, the unity of origin for all mythology as demonstrated by a worldwide comparison of the great primary types and the Kamite origins of that unity, the common origins of the mythical Gentrix, and her brute of 7 elementary forces found in Egypt, in Akka, India, Britain, and New Zealand, who become chronotypes in their secondary and spirits of gods in their final psychotheistic phase. The Egyptian genesis of the chief celestial signs, zodiacal and extra-zodiacal, the origins of all mythology in the Kamite typology, the origins of typology in gesture, signs, and the origin of language in African onomatopoeia. At least sufficient evidence has been produced to prove that all previous discussions and speculation and conclusions concerning the genesis of language, mythology, and fetishism, theophacy, and religion are inadequately, if only because the Kamite element has been hetero omitted, and to show that the non-evolutionists could not possibly bottom any of the beginnings. One object aimed at in these and the previous volumes is to demonstrate that the true subject matter of the, quote, Holy Writ belongs to astronomical mythology. The history first written in the book above, that was sacred because celestial, and that this has been converted into human history in both the Old and the New Testament. The quote, fall in heaven, end quote, was an Egyptian mythos, previously in it being turned into the Hebrew history of man in the Garden of Ur. The Exodus, that is coming out of Egypt, first celebrated the writings of it. From the peculiar nature of the work, it is almost inevitable that critics will have to learn the rudiments of the subject from the volumes offered for review, and greater patience may be needed to reach the root of the matter, or to perceive the author's drift through all the mass of details. Each section is complete in itself, but the serious student will find the whole of them corrective and cumulative. They are called sections to denote that they have not the continuity or narrative, but they are parts of a whole. The claim now to be advanced on behalf of the work is that it sets forth a physical basis for the human beginning in thought, language, and typology, shows the mode in which the primitives, and archaic man attain expression in terms of external phenomenon, demonstrates the natural genesis of signs and symbols, rediscovers the lost foothold of mythology in the phenomena of space and time, and traces the typology of the past into mythology of the present, that it represents the ancient wisdom, the secrets of the mysteries, numerical, physiological, and astronomical, according to the mode in which the gnosis was expressed, that mystical subjects previously dabbed in are for the first time sounded to the depth, and that the foundations of the phallic cult are laid bare without the grin of the Satyr in Greece, Satyr, or the Levidius leer of the subject in its Italian phase by a process as purely scientific as the origin was simply natural. The writer has not only shown that the current theology is, but also how it has been falsely founded on misinterpretation of mythology by unconsciously inheriting and leaving primitive or archaic man and ignorantly mistaking those for divine revelations. The work culminates in tracing the transformation of astronomical mythology into the system of nautical Christology called Christianity, and demonstrating the non-historical nature of the canonic Gospels by means of the original mythos in which the Messianic mystery, that is, the virgin, motherhood, the incarnation and birth, the miraculous life and character, the crucifixion and resurrection of the Savior's Son, who was the Word of all ages, were altogether allegorical. During a dozen years, the writer has put his whole life into his labor, fully facing the fact that the most important parts of his work would be least readable, and that the more thorough the research, the more fundamental the interpretation, the more remote would be in its recognition and the fewer its readers. But the work is warranted to wait, and the author does not doubt that his comparatively few friends at first will be continually increased from many generations of genuine men and women. So that's the conclusion here. And so we're going to get into the part here. It's called the mythical Christ. So see, what we're looking at in Christianity is what we call the historical Jesus. But there is no history of Jesus, you see. It's all a myth. But that was not what the plans were when the church, when the whole idea was invented in Rome, you see. It took Rome till 325 to put all this together, so to speak. And it's more than just simply Constantine putting his both, what we call politically, putting together of his two, the West and the East, and uniting the kingdom, which was part of it. But it's more sinister than that. Okay. When Herodias visited Egypt and recognized the African origins of the Greek deities, he makes the sage remark that his countrymen, in their ignorance of the beginning, counted the birth of their gods from the time when they first acquired a knowledge of them. So was it with the, quote, primitive Christians, end quote, in their ignorance of the natural genesis and past history of Christology. They consisted of the knowing and the simple. The knowing ones kept back the esoteric explanation of the mythos to let the untutored belief in the real history take root. The simple ones, like that is Bunyan, quote, fell suddenly into an allegory about the journey and the way to glory, end quote, which allegory they were led to believe was purely matter of fact. It's talking about, I guess it's Paul Bunyan, not Paul Bunyan. I can't think of his name. Bunyan is his last name, but I'll get it to myself. The writer of Ignatius' epistle to the Philadelphians represents their position. He observes, quote, I have heard some say, unless I find it in the ancient writings, that is, originals or archives, I will not believe it to be written in the gospel. And when I said to them, it is written, they replied to me, it is found written before, in what they call the uncorrupted originals, which Ignatius denounced as a corrupt copies of his original gospel. Quote, to me, he said, quote, Jesus Christ stands instead of all the uncorruptible monuments in the world, together with those untouched or incorruptible monuments. His cross, his death, his resurrection, and his faith, and the faith which is in him, the same standpoint was occupied by Professor Jowett when he wrote, quote, to us, the preaching of the gospel is a new beginning from which we date all things beyond which we neither desire nor are able to inquire. So basically, he's not interested. What he's saying simply is, we neither desire it, we don't care about it, it's not important, or are not able to inquire. So basically, we just cover it up. We don't want to look at it. We don't want to look at anything deeper. And nevertheless, the fact remains to be faced that the gospel of econautical Christology was written before with a totally different reading and that the sayings and dogmas and doctrines, types and symbols, including both the cross and the Christ, did not originate where we may have first made acquaintances with them. It was written before in books of the secret wisdom, now searchable according to the recovered gnosis. It was written before in the types, which are here traced from the lowest root to the highest branch. It was written before in the incorruptible records of the past, inscribed on the starry heavens. You see, quote, the truth is that the real origins of the cult, here called equinoctial Christianity, quote, rather than Christianity, have never yet been reached. However, suspected because of the supposed new beginnings in human history, which was taken for granted by those who knew no further and who had no desire to know. The evidence, however, could not have been adduced before the mythology and topology and Christology of Cam, which is Cam, Mississippi, Egypt, were discovered in the keepings of the mummies and disinterred from the mausoleums of the dead. The lost language of the celestial allegory can now be restored chiefly through the resurrection of ancient Egypt. The scriptures can be read as they were originally written, according to the secret wisdom, and we may now know how the history was first written as mythology. The book of Revelation, for example, contains the oldest matter in the New Testament. This matter is fundamental, and as such lies at the foundation of the human history. No Christian leader doubts that the Jesus or Alpha Omega of the scripture is one with Jesus of the Gospels. Those who adopt it as one of the natural basis for the new beginnings were too ignorant to know the origins and significance of the subject matter. The revelation assigned to John the divine in the Christian form of the Mythical revelation. In the Parsi sacred books, the original scripture are always quoted and referred to as the revelation. It says in Revelation, in the often repeated formula of authority, and the Brahman Yas contained the same drama of mystery that is drawn out and magnified in the book of Revelation. As application of the comparable method will prove this, and without such an application, all the works which are ever written on the book of Revelation are worthless as waste paper. The persons, scenes, and circumstances and transactions are identical in both. Each revelation relates to the Kronian, Kronian allegory, and in both the prophecy is solely astronomical. Zarathustra enters the state of trance to see the future. He remains in that condition during 7 days and nights. John was in a trance, quote, in brackets, in the isle called Patmos, or in the spirit, or on the Lord, the seventh day. Zarathustra is entranced by swallowing some mesmerized or water by which the omniscience wisdom is communicated to him. John swallows a little book which he is commanded to eat and then to prophesy. The visions of Zarathustra relates to the 7 regions of the world founded on the heaven of the Hepanomus, that is John to the 7 churches of Asia. These 7 divisions in space and time are also typified by the tree of 7 metals and 7 branches. In John's vision, the tree is represented by these 7 candlesticks. In both, 7 ages or passing periods of time are portrayed. In both, the world is described as being choked with its unburied dead. The people, quote, perished in the northern quarter, end quote, i.e., in the celestial Egypt, the domain of death and Hades. In both, the beast from the pit appears all the most furious because his time is growing short. In the one revelation, the the hog, or destroying serpent, is said to swallow down 1/3 of mankind, cattle, sheep, and other creatures of Ahura Mazda, end quote. In the other, the great red dragon appeared as a wonder in heaven, end quote, and his tail drew the 3rd part of the stars of heaven and did cast them to the earth. The old Satan and the great harlot are to be cast out, the Persian whore being identified as Venus. It is said when the star Jupiter comes up to its culminating point and casts Venus down, the sovereignty comes to the prince, end quote. The ancient genetrix is to be superseded by another woman who becomes ruler and who appears in Revelation as the mother of the child. Quote, a woman clothed with the sun, S-U-N, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars, end quote. As the coming of her child, the promised prince, born of a virgin, the signal is to be given by a star. Quote, that a sign may come to the earth the night when that prince is born. A star falls from the sky. When that prince is born, the star shows a signal. A star falls from heaven in both visions. The prince of 30 years is identical with the Horus or Christ who manifests at 30 years of age. The two witnesses of the one revelation are the two angels. The two special messages of Ahura Mazda to mankind called Nera Yasain, the angel or friend, and Saros, the righteous, end quote, in the other. The abstat of the one revelation is that the abstat dragon of the other. In both the Persian scriptures and in Revelation, the astronomical prophecies are fulfilled. The millennium arrives, the old heaven of the 7 or 70 divisions pass away. The tree of the Hepatomeus, or primary heaven, or 7 divisions, which are figured by the 7 branches of the tree, not only seen by Zarathustra, but also represented on this Assyrian monuments as well as in the Kamite planisphere, is suspended in the new heaven of the 12 signs and 72 decans by the tree of healing for all nations. Hustera, son of Zararus, is born from Lake Franzdon, and the quote, the creatures becoming more progressing. He utterly destroys the fiend of serpent origin, end quote. The last of the prophets, Zorazasyan, is born, he who is the latest to be the quote, uplifted among the corporal, end quote, Astava Ereto, or incarnating, arising from the water of Kan Shura, end quote, in the eastern quarter, end quote, for the restoration of the world. So John perceives the Christ at last of the prophets. The Savior came. The resurrection of the dead occurred. The drama of redemption was represented there and then at the end of the age, cycle, or world. This is the whole idea. People get confused. This whole thing with the end of the age and cycle and such. People think that end of the world is coming, such and such. And that's how they use fear. You know, that's another thing that these people do. Okay. It's a cycle. It's what the earth does every roughly 26,000 years. You see, it goes around the sun. In the revelation of John, the drama, and each time is changed in a different particular astronomical sign also. In the revelation of John, this drama is dated, and the stellar scenery belongs to the time when the solar birthplace was in the sign of Aries, which was symbolized by the Mithridatic lamb of the Persians as the type of the manifester, called the Messiah. This dates the time of the last pole star in the dragon of the end, the resurrection, the judgment, the new heaven and new renewed earth of the coming one by the year 2410 BC. Roughly, I think it's 2,600 years. That's a rough thing of each age that takes place, that is in each astronomical sign. And the last one we were in, this is talking about Aries, and the next one was, before that was Taurus, and now we're in what we call the age of Pisces, and that age is going to be gone too also. We don't know exactly. It may already gone, so to speak. So in the book of Enoch, the Son of Man takes the seat of the Ancient of Days at the end of the great year, and the manifester or Messiah of the cycle of, and he gives here 25,868 years. Well, this was the book of the revelations of the celestial luminaries according to every year of the world until the new work should be effected, which will be eternal. Hence it is said that in the new heaven they shall not enter upon the enumeration of time. Here, likewise, the manifester, the Cronian Christ, assumed the likeness of the eternity in a psychotheistic phase. No competent scholar has ventured to date the Book of Enoch later than the century previous to the present era, and the subject matter is very ancient. Yet in that, the Messiah has already come as the Son of Man, or God the Father, to supersede the Son of the woman, just as it is in both books of Revelation. Enoch, the stellar and lunar logos, was superseded by the solar God. The name of the Son of Man, living with the Lord of Spirits, was exalted in the chariots of the Spirit. From that time, I was not drawn in the midst of them. The end of the great year has come. The heavens were renewed. All the prophecies there was ever was, according to the gnosis, had been realized. The drama of redemption was played out, and the drop scene let down without any false claim that the mythos had been fulfilled in a human history. The aeonic coming of the Cronian Christ, the promised Redeemer, is not only prophesied by Esdras, is one of the books of wisdom, but is likewise dated. Quote, behold, the time shall come that these tokens which I have told thee shall come to pass, and the bride shall appear, and she coming forth shall be seen, that now is withdrawn from the earth. For my son Jesus shall be revealed with those that be with him, and they that remain shall rejoice with him 400 years. After 3 years shall my son Christ die, and all men that have life, and the world shall be turned into an old silent 7 days, like as in the former judgments, so that no man shall remain. And after 7 days the world that yet awakened not shall be raised up, and that shall die which is corrupt. And the earth shall restore those that are asleep in her, and so shall the dust those that dwell in silence, and the secret places shall deliver those souls that were committed unto them. And the Most High shall appear upon the seat of judgment, and misery shall pass away, and the long suffering shall have an end. End quote. The quote day of doom, end quote, was the quote end of this time. Not end of time, but end of this time. You see. Here it is possible to identify the bride, whose starry image or soul was probably Sothis, Sothis. New Jerusalem was portrayed as the bride coming down from heaven, adored for her husband, the bride that was the wife of the Lamb. In the next sign, she would be the bride Ithacus, the fish. That would date the prophecy roughly from 255 to 400, by the year 655 BC. Surely, if it prophetic and historical were combined anywhere, it must be here, where the subjective matter or subject matter is explained according to the gnosis. Also, the principles of apocalyptic tradition are undoubtedly identical in all the books of wisdom. Yet these books of Esdras are not even included among the canonic scriptures, but are held to be apocalyptic in the modern sense of spurious. So how is it that the scriptures which contain the hidden wisdom and show that the gnosis relate to the fall of Adam, the loss of paradise, and the coming of Jesus the Christ as restorer within 400 years should be rejected in this matter? Quote, because they prove too much and are historically in the wrong sense. They are historically solely in support of the allegory that was Cronium, and the Christ was manifested periodically and was forever. Economically, that is, they show too plainly the way in which the records economically Christology has been written before. The last act is the drama of redemption, is likewise performed in the Gospel of Nicodemus, or the Acts of Pilate, and called the descent of Christ in the underworld. End quote. In this we find the astronomical prophecy is fulfilled on the scale of the great year, the cycle of precession being completed by the Christ meeting and clasping hands with Adam. I wonder, I'm going to ask this question to myself here. I wonder simply is that those in the know this all the time. And every time that this whole thing is beginning to, as it says, within 400 years, would be rejected in this matter. I wonder simply is that they do this each time. I wonder if it's a repetition. Just my thought here, because they've held it back. It is related that the dead were lying in the dark places of Hades, all those who had fallen asleep from the first, when a great light suddenly shone in on them, and they awoke and saw one another. It was the coming of the Christ, who was heralded by John, the last of the prophets. The legend of the tree is repeated. It is said that when Adam was sick unto death, he sent his son Seth to the gates of paradise to pray for a little oil from the tree of life to heal him. But the tree had vanished with the loss of Eden. This tree of life and knowledge is represented as being restored in the shape of the cross. And a solar god who enters Amente once a year is now depicted as doing the same thing at the end of the great cycle, as it was written in the first book of the 70 in a certain sacred volume said to have been preserved by the Jews. The 70 were the princes and rulers in the heaven of 70 divisions, preceding that of the 12 signs and 72 um, decons, in which the lost tree of 7 branches was replaced by the cross of the 4 corners, or the tree of 12 branches. In accordance with the nature of the whole subject, the Christ who joined hands with Adam could only be Cronian, and the cross that typified the returning tree of the lost paradise could be no other than the quote, the cross of the equinox. Virgil knew the nature, if not the date, of the cyclical renovation when he sang the final period of fulfillment, which the Sibyl had foretold, and of the grand series of ages that began afresh in the renewal of the great year. Also, when he asserted that there shall be another, quote, ark, steered by another pilot, hearing the chosen heroes, there shall be other wars, and great Achilles shall be sent once more to Troy. But those who continue the cult of economical Christology is in its final phase, where the men who did not know, they were Gnostics. They believed that at some indefinite period, afterwards dated, the Christ of chronological, the true word that founded the heavens on the periods of time, the word that manifested from the first, had taken flesh at last and manifested once for all in human form. The belief was false, but such is the foundation of the faith. The sign of the cross has been sufficiently identified as a figure of the equinox and the Christ with the sun of the crossing. Upon this rests the cult of economical Christology, when the color of the cross was in the sign of the bull. The Apis, or the god Serapis, was the Christ that suffered and rose again as the typical Messiah. When in the course of procession, the vernal equinox passed into the sign of Aries, the ram of Sebet Ra and of Num Ra, or the lamb of Mithras, typified the Christ that was sacrificed as Savior of the world, at which time the crossing and the place of time of sacrifice were identified with the visible Southern Cross. These forms of solar victim who died and rose again were but very slowly superseded. Hence the ram remained the Christ of the equinox until the 7th century of our era, at which time it was finally replaced by a Christ on the cross who was figured in the human likeness. When the Persian astrologers announced that the Parturiate version bears the Messiah, the future mother of Zarathustra asked, "How hast thou found out the circumstances and exact period of my pregnancy?" And his answer is that he discovered it through the power of knowledge of, let's see where we at here, of the stars and the peruse of those ancient words, which gives an account of his auspicious existence. So the incarnation of Buddha were dated astronomically. His coming was indicated by the Mezzanite star of announcement, or prophetic star of incarnation, and the birthplaces known as astronomical signs. It belongs to the cycle of time, the ends of which were foreknown and prophesied from the beginning. The last of the Buddhas, who is designated all the Buddhas, because like the Gnostic Christ called, quote, all things, or totem, he was the final flower of the whole Pleronium perfected. It's described as having advanced hitherward by making 7 steps forward, 7 steps towards each of the 4 cardinal points of the zodiac. Therefore, he had traversed the circle measured by the 28 lunar asterions. Excuse me. We have seen that this was the course of the 7 rishas, the 7 manas, who are also known as the 7 Buddhas, in fulfilling the cycle and following the path of procession. And Buddha is the manifester of the pleronium of 7 primary forces, faculties, spirits, or gods, which is shown by his symbol of the 8-rated star, the sign of Azura in Assyria, and of the Christ in Rome. And Agni also had been the manifester of the 7 ever since the entrance of the vertical equinox into the sign of the ram. This is shown by the god being portrayed upon his ram with the sign of the ram on a banner borne in front of him, which identifies him with Aries in the zodiac. Agni likewise embodied the 7 powers. These are typified by his figure with 7 arms, and addressed to the god, it is said, Agni, 7 are thy fuels, 7 thy tongues, 7 the holy sages, 7 thy beloved abodes, 7 sayas do 7 sacrifices worship thee, thy sources are 7. These are the 7 that began as elementary in external nature and afterwards became planetary and eschatologically. Study of eschatologically, that is the study of last days, last times. The ram is an Egyptian anagram of a soul, and 7 rams are equivalent to the 7 souls of the solar god, or the 7 spirits of the pleronium of goals now localized in the sign of Aries. The old Sumerians at Nablus still sacrificed 7 lambs at their Passover or festival of the vernal equinox. These are identified with the cross by being spitted upon it, and also with the cross erected in the zodiac sign of the ram or lamb. This type of the 7 souls or spirits is continued in the 7 lambs of the Christian iconographical grouped about the mount or throne upon which stands the Christ, even as the 7 stands as spirits round the throne of the Lamb in Revelation. The 7 sacrificial lambs took the place of the 7 bullocks, offered upon the 7 altars of Balak that point back to the time when the vertical color was in the sign of the bull. Moreover, the eye is a symbol of reproduction. As such, it was figured as a constellation in the place of rebirth, and the lamb with 7 eyes in Revelation is a 7-fold type of the birthplace in the sign of Aries, and the station of the 7 powers, the pleronium, whose manifester was the lamb, the Horus, Buddha, Mithras, Sabet, Io, or the Christ. In typology, nothing can be more important than the types. The cult of economical Christology is found on the mythical types, however interpreted, that is, and this typical 7 with his 8-rated ray star, that is, the manifester is all important in proving the identity and continuality of the mythical Christ in conjunction with the 7 powers in their final psychotheistic phase. The birthplace of the, quote, coming one as it passed from sign to sign was indicated by the typical, quote, star in the east, end quote. And the star in the east will afford undeniable data for showing the mythical and celestial origins of the gospel history. When the divine child is born, the wise men or magi declare that they have seen his star in the east. The wise men are identified as the 3 kings of other legends who are not to be derived from the canonic gospels. The 3 kings of these 3 solar representatives are as ancient as the male triad that was first typified when the 3 regions were established as heaven, earth, and the nether world, from which the triad bring their gifts, and the 3 rulers were impersonated, for example, in the red Atom, the black Ka, and white Hu, who accompanied the god Har Kruti, Kruti, in the scene of the Hades. When the birthplace was in the sign of the bull, the star in the east that arose to announce the birth of the babe was Orion, which is therefore called the star of Horus. That was once the star of the three kings, for the three kings is still a name of three stars in Orion's belt. And on the hieroglyphics, that is, hieroglyphics, a three-looped string is a symbol of Sahur, Sahuie, the constellation of Orion. Orion was the star of the three kings, which rose to show the time and place of birth in heaven some 6,000 years ago, when the vertical equinox was in the sign of the bull. When the color passed into the sign of the ram, 2410 BC, the triangle of pyramid, or the pyramid of Harakruti, became the star in the east that rose in the decans of Aries to show the solar birthplace during the 2155 years. Here it might be argued that the Great Pyramid built in Egypt with power to demonstrate the ending of the great year and the final overthrow of the dragon was set in the planisphere to mark the point of recommendus in the circle of procession. The name of the Great Pyramid is Kruti, or the lights. The lights, whether as constellations or planets, are seven in number, and the pyramid is figured of seven, which unites the square and triangles in one. Horus of the triangle is Horus. Horus is the triangle, is Horus of the pyramid. Harsephet or Sebiti, Sep equals SEB equals 5, TI equals 2. Satanot is called the Lord of Sap and Nerau, Nerau, and Sap is the place of the seventh, the place of the pleronium and its manifestor, which shifted according to the color of the equinox. Harakruti is the Lord of the lights that were seven in number, the perfect star of the Gnostic pleronium, soul of the seven spirits, breather of the seven breaths, word of the seven vowel sounds, bull of the seven cows, stone of the seven eyes, ram of the seven horns, player of the seven pipes on the planetary scale of seven tones. He is portrayed in the decans of the ram, holding the pyramid or triangle as his star in the east. This god was a survivor of the ancient Sut Horus. Those Egyptologists who have been unable to follow the developments of astronomical mythology have looked upon the cult of Harakruti as a latter importance into Egypt, whereas it belonged to a continuation of the mythos by those who wrote history in the stars of heaven. Horus of the pyramids above was the Horus of the great pyramids at Giza, G-H-I, sorry, I'm spelling it wrong. I'm going to pronounce it wrong. G-H-I-Z-E-H, the Horus of the Shus in Har, and the Lord of the seven lights is identified with the IAO Hepatatis of the Chaldeans and the IAO Chunibus or Panaugira of the Gnostics, and Alpha Omega the All in Revelation. The mystery of the seven stars relate to the new heaven established when the vertical equinox enters the sign of the ram or lamb, and the pyramid or triangle of Horus becomes the star in the east that beckons the wise men or magi or Gnostics to birthplace of the Messianic babe. Here, the god of the seven lights, rays, powers, or planets is the Alpha Omega of the seven eyes, seven lamps of five, seven golden candlesticks, who has seven stars in his right hand. Just as Harakruti holds the stars of the pyramid, the figure of seven in his right hand, and the sign of rule in his left. This then is the Jesus of economical Noachical Christology in the book of Revelation, who was the Lord of the seven lights in the astronomical allegory from the year 2410 BC. Among other philological fallacies is the current assumption that the Greek name of Icarus was derived from the Hebrew Jehoshaphat. Theology is indefinite in such matters without the typology and the natural genius and phenomenon. I.E. or IU in Egyptian means the coming one, the duplicator who is of a plural nature. Har-IU, H-A-R-I-U, the reduplicate Horus was a title or Osiris in the sense. In Hep, the second atom, atum, called the Son, the Word or Logos of God the Father was the coming one. He who came with or as peace and brought good luck and happiness. The calf-headed God, Ak, Au, whose name denotes the past, present, and future of being. The Hebrew Iaho, the Phoenician, Chaldean, and Gnostic Iaw, the British Iau, Mons, Manxir, Delphine, Apollo, designated IE, were forms of this Iu, the ever-coming one who was personified as a divine child that is Sut, whence Isus, which was Jesus, is the coming child whose mother's name is in one cult is Isusius or Jehoshaphat, and Jesus were two names derived on two different lines from one original root, and the name has to be determined by the nature of the type. The Camite Iu and Chaldean Iohephatus, God of the seven rays or lights, were continual as the Alpha Omega, who is Jesus in the book of Revelation. As already shown, the one God called Iu or Iao became the solar representation of pluralium of seven powers, lights, or spirits that were expressed by this divinity in the human image of the Trinity, composed of the mother, child, and virile male in unity. Thus, the divine hepatode and the human triad were combined in a tenfold totality, and the IU or Alpha Omega is the personal equivalent of the 10 in numbers. The God of the seven spirits or breaths were represented by the ineffable name, which consisted of the sevenfold vowel as the summit of all previous attainment in sound, and in both are co-products traceable to conscious evolution. Seven elements of the consummated deity being expressed by the seven vowels in one sound, like A, I, E, O, U, or a diphthong. Among other mysteries declared by Marcus, he taught that the restitution of all things occurred when all the numbers of the ineffable name mixing in one letter should utter one and the same sound. Irenaeus says Marcus, quote, imagine that the emerald of this utterance was found in Amen, which we pronounce in concert. Marcus did not imagine, he knew. Nice. Being a Gnostic, you see. Amen in Revelation is a title of the God, Alpha Omega. In Egyptian, both Amen and Iu mean come, to come, the coming one. Iu was originally written as AA, and the pyramid or triangular pyramid is AA by name. As a triangle, the sign is threefold. As a pyramid, it unites the square and the triangle and is sevenfold. Therefore, it could be a sign of the 10 total, which was also figured thus. As a pyramid 10 by the Pythagoreans, an image of the all composed of seven elementary forces expressed in threefold human form. The name could be uttered by a single sound or sign as it was by the Hebrew Jah in 10 or two hands. The Egyptian pyramid, the Chinese, the British, and on still at Lloyd's, or the Coptic with inherited U, which has a numeral value of 10. This was a mode of expressing the representation of divine unity comprising the seven elementary powers, together with the human trinity in a 10 total by one side and a single sound, and this I, pyramid IU, or Alpha Omega, is a symbol of the name Isis, or Isus, that is Jesus. IU, duplicate of dual one, the Greek Isus, as the Alpha Omega in Revelation. The pyramid is the letter A, its stellar form, and the divinity Arkuti, Arsepti, the IU, Alpha Omega, or IAO, is the primary one answering to the A at the head of the alphabet, who as a child or son, Su, is Usus, or Ususus, ISO, or Jesus. The name of Horus also has the meaning of number 10. And Harkuti of the seven lights is the god one, 10. Of the triangle, that is the Trinity, and pyramid, he Hoboden, the symbol of the three and the seven. Lastly, this god 1, 3, 7, and 10, whose title was at length expressed by the first and final letter of the Greek alphabet, that is Alpha and Omega, is the Pubisi male, who was born of the Virgin Mother without the fatherhood, third in Advent, but placed first in series as the representation of all the powers, whose natural genesis had been traced to lunar phenomenon, and who is the solar mythos was the opponent and vanquisher of the beast with the 10 horns, which represented the total of the opposing triphonic powers. The seven breaths are assigned to the Holy Spirit by Justin. Macrobitz also affirms that the soul of the world is of sevenfold origin. These seven continue from the elementary of chaos. The Hindu Agyu was at times portrayed with two faces, three legs, and seven arms. So you see the number here is again is to do with 12. As a form of this one total God of duplicate nature, twin in sex, triagonal in form, and manifester of the seven primary powers. Thus, the name of Jesus can be traced to IU, the coming one, and SU, the child of either sex who grows up with attributes of both, and to the Deus and Trinitas Unus, the typical manifester under various names of the seven elementaries, seven chromium types, seven spirits, planets, lamps, or lights, which constitute the polarium of powers from the first, and such is the mystery of the seven stars. According to the Syriac version quoted by Bunsen, Bunsen, in the concluding passage of the Epistle of Ignatius to the Ephesians, three shouting mysteries, end quote, were connected with the star of annihilation in heaven. The passage reads, quote, from the moment that the star appeared, and thus the sun was manifested upon the spot, the reign of darkness, of magic, of death ceased, and the earthly development of God's own eternal kingdom began, end quote. The three shouting mysteries are so ancient in the celestial allegory that they are also essent in the Chinese sign of the, quote, three lights, denoting the supernatural mystery and revelation, also as the three shouts of the British Bardus, which are symbolized by the triple sign of their triune being, named IOX, looks like it is. The younger, as they were also represented by the three stars of the constellation, triangular, in the dreams of the decades of the Ram, which was the typical star in the east after the year 2410 BC. About 255 BC, the sun, or more correctly, the color of the Veronica Argonauts, entered the sign of the fishes. Thenceforth, for 2155 years, that astronomism became the station of the cross and the birthplace of the solar Christ. Here we find the pleronium of seven powers as the seven great gods of Assyria. That is, the mouth associated with the sign is dedicated to the pleronium of seven gods, of which Azura was manifested. It is, of course, impossible for this to have commenced as such for the first time with the year 255 BC. It's sufficiently, however, for the present purpose to know that which the re-entrance of the vernal equinox into the sign of Pisces, the solar birthplace, was once more in the quarter of the beginning that of the waters and of the great fish, the hippopotamus, or other types of this mouth, or Eutychus, the Piscinia creation, the place of imagination and point of re-emergence from the waters of the abyss, out of which issues the river of the waterman, the fish from the river, and the manifester born from the fish. This was the Egyptian Anu, or celestial Heliopolis, which had retained the name of the fish, and original represented by the great fish, the Ketos, the water horse, or dragon of the deep. The star Fomalhaut, for example, is still the mouth of the fish that marks the place of emanating from the waters, which was continued to the Presena, or Vesicus Pisces, the Roman embryo of Mary, the Rue, of the mother who was Ma or Mu by name. Thus, when the solar birthplace at the time of the vernal equinox passed once more into the zodiac sign of Pisces, it had come round to the primordial point of emanation from the quarter of the waters in the beginning. The gentrix under the fish type as Hathor, Atargatis, or Semiramis was at last figured in the sign of the fishes, which she brought forth her divine child as her fish. Hence the fish goddess and her young one were portrayed as the two zodiac fishes instead of the earlier one, who had represented the sign 25,868 years earlier. The Messiah who manifested in this sign was foreordained to come as Isius the fisherman, or doctrinally the fishers of men. In the backward cycle of precession, Pisces is the first of the three water signs. Hence it was foretold that the Christ, under various names, was to ascend from the waters. The earliest mode or form of imagination being from the waters, the great another mother that is first brought to birth as the water element under some water type. The primordial manifestation in Chaldea was the Owen or fishman. In one account, there are four of these fishmen, or anadotia, and there are seven altogether. These two groups are identical with the four genii and the total family of a seven in the Egyptian ritual. The fish of Horus and Sebel in the crocodile. The fish itself being an earlier type than the fishman, the fish in An, A-N in Egyptian. The fish region, Anuk, is the solar birthplace, and Ischus, the fish, has been continued from the beginning. Hence the, what was that word? Oh, manifester was the one who was born of the waters, who came forth from the celestial deep, who crossed the waters at the fish or inside of it, who were personified as the oar, O-A-R, or as was Horus, and the steersman, the lord of the boat or art that saved souls from the abyss and the deluge. Quote, rising from the great water is my name, says the Orpheus by. In this character, this is the manifester who is foreseen by Esdras coming up out of the sea as the same whom God the highest had kept a great season, which by his own self shall deliver his creature. End quote. The character assigned to the Christ of the Gospels, the fishman Onias, only came up out of the Erythraean Sea, that is the pool of Pant, P-A-N-T, in the ritual, to converse with men and teach them in the daytime. When the sun set, said Herodotus, it was the custom of this being to plunge again into the sea and abide all night in the deep, for he was amphibious. In like manner, the man who comes up out of the sea is visible only by day. Quote, even so can no man upon earth see my son, or those that be with him, but in the daytime. End quote. This is a paradox, or fulfilled in account of Ischus the Christ. Who instructs men by day, but retires to the lake of Galilee, where he demonstrates his solar nature by walking on the water at night. The Son of Man, who hath not where to lay his head, goes on board the boat to sleep, which is also a parallel to the aunt going down into the sea for the night. We are told that the disciples being on board ship when, quote, whenever was come, when eve was come, I should say, end quote. And another quote here, in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto the walking on the sea, end quote. Now the fourth watch began at 3 o'clock and ended at 6 o'clock. Therefore, this was about the proper time for a solar god to appear walking upon the waters, coming up out of them as the Onus. Onus is said to have taken no food while he was with men. In the daytime, he used to converse with men, but took no food at that season, end quote. So Jesus, when his disciples prayed him, saying, quote, Master, eat, said unto them, quote, I have meat to eat that you know not of. My meat is to do the will of him that sent me, end quote. This is the perfect replica of the character of Onus, who took no food, but whose time was wholly spent in teaching men. Moreover, the fishman is made to identify himself when the Pharisees ought a, quote, sign from heaven. Jesus said, there shall no sign be given but the sign of Jonas, end quote. For as Jonas became a sign unto the Ninevites, so shall also the Son of Man be to this generation, end quote. The sign of Jonas is that of the one or fisherman of Nineveh, whether we take it direct from the monuments or from the Hebrew history of Jonah. It was inside the fish during the 3 days and night is equally the fish man or the man imaginated as Vishnu is from the fish in Hindu drawings, and as the man child is brought forth in the sign of the fish by the fish goddess in the year 255 BC. Assuredly, there was no other sign that the sun reborn in Pisces. The voice of the secret wisdom says those who are looking for signs can have no other than that of the returning fishman, Ithacus, Onius, or Jonas, who could not be made flesh. So we're going to probably stop here. I'm going to say a little bit more here. My voice is about to go. The Valenians maintained that this incident, typical Jesus, was identified with Pan. Pan in the Greek version being Christus in the Latin text because he included the names of all those who had produced him, and Pan as manifestor may be seen in the decons of the bull sign. He was portrayed with a face of fire, holding 7 circles in his left hand, but the extant evidence how shows that the great starting point for modern equinoctial Christology was with the sign of the ram, and the next stage with the fishes. The fact is patent in the ionographic of the Roman catacombs. The two signs are 2,155 years apart in time, yet they are connected by indissoluble links. The Christ having been born a ram and a fish before he was defeated in the human likeness. And we're going to stop here. So thank you for being here. Yeah, it's a little long, hour and 16 minutes approximately. Again, I want to share this work with you. If I have a little bit more energy tonight, I may do it, but I don't think so. It's approximately 8 o'clock. So I wish you a good evening. Thank you for listening. Again, this is from the Historical Jesus and the Mythical Christ. That is the separation fact from fiction. And this book was produced by a company called the Book Tree out of Escondido, California. And this book roughly has a price only approximately $19. And it is a paperback, although it has a glossy top part to protect it. So, but anyway, thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. And you take care. And we'll talk to you later.